All right, this is section 4, talking about plant structure and function of plants. So there's 3 types of tissues that make up a plant. The first type is called dermal tissue, and this is basically like the skin of the plant. So it's the protective outer layer. You can also call it the epidermis. Humans also have an epidermis, and that's just the skin that you see on the outside layer of your body. Sometimes on a plant, though, that epidermis will also be covered in a waxy covering called a cuticle. And the whole purpose of the cuticle is to kind of prevent water loss, so that water doesn't evaporate from those leaves. They can also have a layer of dead cells, which we call cork, and that cork is a waterproof layer for that plant. Another type of tissue is called ground tissue. This is when we have a lot of thick-walled cells. This is usually where your photosynthesis is going to occur, and it's just there to be kind of supportive to the vascular tissue that's moving through the center of the plant. It's also going to support that outer dermal layer as well. And then the vascular tissue is the xylem and the phloem. And so the xylem, again, remember, carries water, and the phloem is going to be transporting sugar for us. So just to kind of break these down a little bit more detailed, that xylem is going to have really thick walls for each of their cells. And what it does is it uses capillary action to help move the water from the roots of the plant up to the leaves. So we need to get water up to those leaves so that photosynthesis can occur. You have to have water present, and without it, we wouldn't be able to have the plant make its own sugar. So it looks like this one right here on the left. And actually they're showing it as this thicker cell. So this would be a whole vascular bundle. And then the xylem, you can see much bigger, much thicker openings. And then the phloem is not going to have any organelles, and they're just a sieve tube. So they have little tiny pores that are going to allow the sugar to go from one cell to the next. And it's going the opposite direction. So now the sugar is actually going from the leaves where we're making it down to the roots to be stored long term. And oftentimes in a plant, you end up eating that root. So that's usually the yummy, sugary part of the plant that we end up eating. So the roots are just there to act as an anchor, but they're also going to be helping us absorb all the water and mineral nutrients from the soil. They're also going to help us store energy long term in the form of starches. So that's that nice complex sugars that we're storing down there. They have tiny little root hairs that come off of each of the roots. And what that does is just increase the surface area so we can absorb more water at any given time. And then at the very tip of the root, they have something called a root cap. What that allows the plant to do is kind of keep pushing down further and further into the soil, but it's protected. So we're not going to actually damage those growing healthy cells of the plant that are pushing further. There's 2 types of roots. In a taproot, just like it sounds, you kind of have one central root that goes down and then a few smaller little branches that come off of it. So these are mainly in dicots, and it allows the plant to get to a really deep water source. So it can go way down in the soil till it hits some water. The opposite of this would be the fibrous roots. This is where they're going to sit a little higher and closer to the surface, but they're going to branch off in a lot of different directions. These are plants that usually live on the prairie. They can survive with very little rainfall because that root system goes so far and wide. It can kind of soak up water no matter where it hits the ground. For the stems of plants, what they're there for is to support the leaves. They're also going to help bring that xylem and phloem tubes up and down through the plant, so from leaves to roots. There's 2 types of stems, a non-woody one, just like it sounds. It's not like wood, so it's very flexible. The plant can actually exchange gases up in the leaves through something called stomata, and we'll talk about that in a second. And the main part of the stem then is going to be made of cortex and a pith. The pith is the inner core, and that's surrounded by the cortex, which is just kind of the area sitting between that outer layer and those vascular bundles. And then a woody stem, just like it sounds, it's wood. So it's hard, it's inflexible. Sometimes they don't even have leaves, so they have to actually get the gases through pores in the bark of the tree. And that wood layer is going to be mostly xylem, and then the outer bark layer is going to be cork, which are the dead cells, and then your phloem, which is sugar. The leaves of plants are both ground tissue and vascular tissue. You also have dermal tissue, which is that cuticle sitting on top of all of it. So making up kind of this ground tissue, we have these things called mesophyll layers. There's a palisade mesophyll, which you can kind of see sitting right here under this top epidermis layer. and palisade are these tall columns. So they're really long cells, and that's actually where photosynthesis is occurring. In the spongy mesophyll, that's the layer right under it. Literally looks like a sponge. There's lots of little open spaces where gas can come in, and we actually exchange gases through those little stomata on the underside of the leaf. So that's where the gases are coming in to allow us to do photosynthesis in that layer above it. And protecting those stomata are these things called guard cells. So it's actually two of them, one sitting here and one sitting there, so left and right of this opening, and the opening is the stomata. And what happens then is, like at night, they open up to allow gases to be swapped. So CO2 is going into the plant so we can use it for photosynthesis, and then our waste product of photosynthesis is oxygen, and that comes out at night. If it's a really hot day, they can actually pinch shut, and that's what allows us to then keep the water in the plant so we don't lose, all that extra water we've been working so hard to absorb through the roots. So here's kind of basic leaf structure. We'll just walk through the parts really quick. So here's the top layer, that's the epidermis. Right under that is your palisade mesophyll, those tall columns, and that's where photosynthesis is going to occur. The layer under that is the spongy mesophyll, and we can see these air pockets here where gases can be exchanged. Here's my stomata on the underside of the leaf. This is also an epidermis layer down here. And then the guard cells protect each side of that opening, that stomata. And then right in the middle of the leaf, this is my vascular tissue. So I have xylem and phloem tubes both together kind of bundled into those long tubes. So we need all these different tissue types to basically do photosynthesis. Plants are also going to use pigments, and pigments help it absorb certain wavelengths of light. We have to use our xylem to get water to the cells, and then we use our stomata to get the gases in and out. So we'll be going more into photosynthesis in our next unit, that's unit 13, where we'll learn, the whole equation for photosynthesis and what's happening exactly in each step and how many it takes to make that happen. But for right now, just know for photosynthesis to occur, we have to have water and carbon dioxide and sunlight going into the plant. And in turn, the plant then makes sugar in the form of carbs and oxygen as waste products. And then it'll later use that sugar to make energy. So light has a whole bunch of different colors or wavelengths of light. Just remember the acronym ROY G BIV. So those are all the colors of the rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. And we have different pigments that help us absorb these different wavelengths of light. So one of the main pigments that you've probably learned already is chlorophyll. Chlorophyll actually absorbs all the blues and red colors, and it reflects more of the greens and yellows. So chlorophyll A is going to look a little bit darker green because it's actually reflecting some of that blue light, whereas chlorophyll B looks much lighter because it's actually reflecting some greens and yellows. So we're absorbing all these darker colors and kind of reflecting the lighter ones, which is why most plants to our eyes look greenish yellow, okay? Or either a dark green, which is a mix of those blue greens, or a really light green, kind of because of what we're reflecting. We're not absorbing those pigments. And then one more pigment that can be found in plants is called a carotenoid. And what they do is they actually reflect yellow-orange or red light. And so they're absorbing all those darker blues and greens, which is why, in fall months, your wavelengths of light change as the Earth rotates. Not as much sunlight is hitting the Earth directly. And so we have to absorb different wavelengths of light. So this pigment allows plants then to get those other wavelengths and therefore reflecting different wavelengths, which is why, in the fall, leaves change color. It's actually because of these pigments. And this chart is just showing, here's our wavelengths of light in nanometers down below. And here's each of the pigments. So you can see chlorophyll A absorbs a lot of this blue, but it kind of reflects the lighter blues, the greens, and the yellows, but then it's absorbing all that orangey and the red. So that's why it looks kind of dark green if a plant has that pigment. For chlorophyll B, a little bit lighter green looking to our eye because it's absorbing all these dark blues. It's reflecting the light greens, light yellows, and then absorbing the reds and oranges again. And then carotenoids, they absorb all these dark blues and greens, and then right here it caters off and just kind of reflects all the yellows, oranges, and reds, which is why leaves look that color to our naked eye. That pigment can't absorb any of those wavelengths of light. So for the plant, it has to have water, again, like we said, to do photosynthesis. And on really hot days, water likes to evaporate from the leaves of plants. That's called transpiration. It's part of the water cycle. We did that way back in Unit 3, the ecology unit. And again, we need those guard cells protecting the stomata to make sure that we don't lose water out those little openings on the underside of our leaves. All right, and that ends section 4 notes.